Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I want to welcome you back to the Rubrik Zero Labs virtual summit. This session is about the cost of unpreparedness to your business. Your speakers are Stephen Stone, head Rubrik Zero Lab, and Heather Hughes, vice president, customer engagement with Aon. Now, before I bring them onto our virtual stage, a little bit of background. When it rains, it pours. Few organizations are prepared for the data deluge caused by ransomware. But the organizations able to understand and limit data theft and have recoverable backups are in the most resilient position in the face of ransomware attacks. So in this session, you'll hear from the head of Rubrik Zero Labs, Steve Stone. He sits down with leading cyber insurance organization Aon's VP of Customer Engagement, Heather Hughes, to discuss breach impacts to an organization, positive and negative, reality of backups across clients, what organizations can do to improve risk posture, and how this ultimately affects organizations' cyber insurance. With that, let me turn you over now, Stephen and to Heather. Folks, center stage is yours.
Thanks, Tom, for that warm introduction. We really appreciate it. As mentioned, I'm Steve Stone from Rubrik Zero Labs. Really excited to dive into different aspects of our newest report, which really focuses around measuring your data's risk. In this session, I'm really excited to have Heather Hughes join us from Aon. Heather, would you mind just giving us a quick touch on your role there at Aon?
Thanks so much. I'm Heather Hughes. I'm a vice president of engagement management. I sit in our Houston, Texas office, and I manage proactive and reactive cybersecurity engagements.
Great. Well, that background and what Aon does, I'm really excited to jump in. So I'm just going to go ahead and fire away. Heather, if you wouldn't mind, I'd just kind of like to start with some of the feels versus some of the hard data. One of the things that we heard a lot when we worked with the external organizations, there's this feeling of unpreparedness that a lot of organizations feel when it comes down to evaluating risk. They definitely feel it when it comes to ransomware. And we even hear it a lot when organizations that have gone through a breach talk about their confidence if they had to go through another breach. So that jumped out to me a lot as a researcher. And I'd be really curious, starting with that, how does that map to your experiences hands-on responding to these events with Aon?
So I think even the most prepared organizations, the ones that have great controls in place and maybe even a large staff, I think the thing that surprises them most is the intensity of a ransomware attack or a cyber attack and how long it takes not only to just do the forensic investigation, but to do full remediation and restoration. So every single client that I have that is going through, especially a ransomware attack, I try to talk them off the ledge that this is not going to be over in 2 days. And I think that they have in their mind that there's a big red button that they can push and everything is fine and everything's back up and running. And even if they're doing tabletops, I mean, if they're doing everything right, they're sitting down for 3 or 4 hours and doing a tabletop. Well, in their mind, well, after 4 hours, everything's okay. And so I think that's the biggest struggle, and the staff and resources that it takes to get a company, especially a large organization, through a full cyber attack. I mean, a lot of times they're bringing on-site resources on, temporary IT staff, maybe the forensic responders are even on site. People are sleeping at the office. They're working around the clock. With a lot of pressure coming from the board and the C-suite that, we have to make payroll or we have to get deliveries out, we have to service our customers or patients. And so I think you can't really judge the pressure and the intensity until you've actually been through it.
Yeah, I agree. There's just so much that happens that I think catches a lot of organizations off guard, even if they feel prepared going into it. You mentioned something that also came up really heavily in our research. So I just want to kind of jump right onto that, which is this perception that there's an event and then it's over. We see that that's just not the case. I've seen that in my own career. We talk about it a lot in this report, actually, this concept of steady state risk. Then you have an intrusion. That intrusion leads into recovery. That leads into reset, which is your new steady state risk. And then it just, goes all over again. And what we really wanted to try to address was that exact mindset you're talking about, that organizations think a breach has happened, we'll just get through the next 48 hours and then it's done. And that's just not the way it works. And you have the tough job of helping organizations on each side of that breach. And I'd be really interested, how do you work with customers to help address that mindset and shift from that discrete event to this almost continuous cycle?
So really at the beginning, we try, if a lot of our clients want to have outside counsel, and if they don't, we try to really illustrate why that's important. And the long tail of a cyber attack is the reason. So a breach coach or outside counsel who has experience in cybersecurity is going to handle things. So after you've figured out how the threat actor got in and where they moved and did they exfiltrate data, there's going to be some data breach notification requirements. All 50 states have data breach notification laws. If a threat actor has been in your system and they've accessed files, then you may have a breach depending on the regulation or the state. If they've exfiltrated, then you absolutely do. And so, you do a forensic investigation maybe for 3 weeks, you're back up, you've got remediation, restoration is about done. And then the notification has to start. So there's probably going to be some blowback from that, because if you're notifying consumers, employees, patients, and you're offering to pay for credit monitoring, that's probably going to trigger a second wave of paranoia and, people calling the company. That may trigger some public relations issues. But then even in the middle of an attack, your customers are probably not being serviced. And so, in healthcare, you might be turning patients away. In transportation, the goods may not be delivered. And so your customers or your patients may choose to go somewhere else. And whether they choose to go somewhere else in the interim or the long term is a huge heartache for our clients. They go, well, we have to service our customers, and if we send them to a competitor for the next 3 or 4 weeks while we figure this out, how do we know they're going to come back? So the business interruption, the lost revenue, the lost customers, or even for short-term lost customers, and then the customer's faith in the organization, all of that is a very long tail, and that can take months or years to rehabilitate.
Yeah, and you mentioned another thing I think is just really important, and something again that we came across in our research is this concept of the pain that threat actors can inflict and the duration of that. And I think increasing that duration of that pain event is one of the really big shifts over the last, we could say 2 years, we can go back 3 years, 4 years. So I'd be really interested in, what do you see as those demonstrable shifts that are really enabling ransomware actors to prolong that pain period?
So I think, one, I have a lot of clients or people I've met with in different industries who really just think they're not targets. They're not big enough, or, they don't, for a long time, they were telling me, we don't have a lot of records, we don't do credit cards. And my answer to them is, if you make money, you're a risk, because the pain point is for you to not make money. And if you can't service your clients, you can't service your customers, your patients, that's a pain point. And the threat actors know that. So obviously, initially, it was encryption and try to get to the backups to encrypt those, because if you shut them down, the business interruption is the pain point. And then, the clients make a business decision of, if I'm losing $1 million a day in revenue, and it's going to take us 10 to 12 days to build from what backups that we still have versus a $3 million ransom demand. A lot of times it's a business decision on whether or not they pay the ransom. But what we're seeing lately, obviously, is that if the threat actors can't get to backups, or if they can't encrypt the entire system, they're exfiltrating data. So there might be an initial ransom demand for the decryptor, but either the threat actor figures out that you don't need the decryptor, or that happens in negotiations. And then the threat actors say, well, we exfiltrated a terabyte of your data, including employee information, intellectual property, customer list, pricing list, whatever. And we're going to publish that if you don't pay us. And that extends it, because, when you're doing the negotiations and trying to figure out to pay or not to pay, a lot of it is forensic. Do we need a decryptor? But at some point, the fact that they may publish your data, or even some of these threat actor groups are calling employees, they're threatening to call the SEC if it's a publicly traded company, that extends the communications. It extends the headache for the client, and it opens up a whole can of worms about, okay, well, now we have the threat that all this information is going to be out there, and how do we know that paying the threat actor is going to keep that from happening?
Well, you mentioned the backup word. So, here at Rubrik, there's no way I can let that one slide without diving into that a little bit. It's a core position of strength for us. We start with backup and recovery, and everything we do is built off of that. So for Zero Labs, while we're designed to be vendor agnostic, we do research the realities of backups quite a bit. And one of the things that we talked about in this report, and I think it pairs very well with Aon's public reporting as well, is backup's really important. There's three things that we talked about in this report in particular. One is that if an organization has recoverable backup, it's the largest lever they can have to how they can control their own recovery. There's research out of Europe that if you have a recoverable backup, you're 27 times less likely to pay a ransom, just orders of magnitude. And then the second thing we see is, a good number of organizations don't have backups that work when it comes to recovery. The Aon metric that really jumped out to me from your team's research is, 70% of backups that Aon encounters are not recoverable or not immutable. So that really caught our attention. And then we'd be remiss if I didn't mention what you already mentioned. I hate to steal your own words here, but attackers know how important backups are. We see attackers routinely go after backups and have some level of success, and there's a lot of variation there, but that's a real factor. Threat actors want to remove backups from the defender's capabilities. So that's our biased worldview, and we recognize we're very biased on that here at Rubrik. But kind of everything I mentioned there, how does that map to your perspective and your worldview? Do you see it similar, different? I'd be really curious for that outside view on this very biased topic for us.
No, I agree wholeheartedly because, I have clients that have backups, if they're not immutable, then a lot of times they're either affected in some way or it takes them so long to build from backups that sometimes they make the business decision I mentioned earlier that it's better for their business to pay the ransom, even if the backup wasn't encrypted, because they can't recover the data from the backup fast enough, versus having a decryptor on the main servers and main files that they can get up and running right away. So yeah, I agree that the backups are important, and the threat actors, like I said, if they can't get to the backups, that's when they're going to start exfiltrating the data. And so the good thing is, I've had several clients that have great backups. So they knew they weren't going to have to pay a decryptor. They were going to be up and running. And then, the threat of if something is exfiltrated, are we going to pay to not have that be published? But you can look at the file tree. So in the negotiation with the threat actor, you get the file tree that they took. And then forensically, we go through that with the client and figure out, is this sensitive information? Is it information that is going to harm you or your customers or your employees if it gets published? And a lot of times, and again, this is where outside counsel is really valuable. Outside counsel may say, you're already notifying people of the data breach, that their information is out there, and a threat actor has it. So is it any information in addition to what we are already notifying people? And again, that's a business decision, because I have had clients go, no, that's our engineering schematics. That's some of our intellectual property. We don't want that out there.
Yeah, we see it all the time, that assessment, that decision organizations have to make about what is that material loss. And I know that's a very powerful term in legal circles that a lot of the response folks, we kind of have to, figure out. But I think it's really important. And it goes in this other lever we really see along with backups, which is data theft. I mean, if you can control data theft, there's a lot of control you can put into these crisis moments. So I'd be curious what your perspective is on either tools you really advocate for organizations to have before an incident, or things that they need to do, and whether it's process or technology. But what do you see being really impactful once organizations are also in these ransomware events and now need to figure these things out?
So I think the big three on technology obviously is multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response, and really good backups. Those are the big three from technology. And then from policies and internal development, having a up-to-date incident response plan, probably some incident response playbooks specific to ransomware, business email compromise, insider threat, depending on the organization, and then practicing those. Having tabletop exercises that are real world, so that everybody knows their role, everybody knows what's going to happen when they get the phone call at 10 o'clock on a Friday night that everything is down. And then I would say, obviously, a lot testing, all of those systems, testing to make sure that they're working the way they're supposed to be working. But and then the final thing really is employee training. And it can't just be, a once a year, 30-minute training. It has to be continuous real life phishing exercises and some sort of result if employees continue to fail them or click on phishing emails. Because, as we both know, companies can have really robust security, but if an employee opens an attachment or clicks on a link or enters their credentials, then they're just opening the door to the threat actor.
I think that's so important, thinking about organizations. We talk a lot about threat, rightfully so. We talk a lot about tooling, rightfully so. In your experience, do you see commonalities or trends in what catches organizations off guard? What are they not ready for when they get into these crisis situations, particularly with ransomware?
So I think mostly it's if they have tools in place, they're surprised that it happened at all. And the great thing about like an endpoint detection response tool is it can catch it quick and quarantine it. That doesn't mean you're not going to have an incident. It doesn't mean you're not going to have business interruption. And I think that surprises them. Well, we had this, so it should have just been caught. And then like 2 hours later, everything's better. And it's not, because you still have to figure out how did it happen. You still have to do a forensic investigation. So I think that is surprising for the companies that are mature. And then the other surprising thing that happens a lot is a lot of our clients will outsource. So they'll have a managed service provider, and they just have assumed that they're handling everything. So they really have no knowledge to even what they have. When I do a first scoping call, and if they don't have the managed service provider on the call, they don't know what tools they have. They don't know what kind of email they have. They really have just completely outsourced it. And I don't know that that's always the greatest way to do it. If you're going to outsource it, you still have to have someone internally that is communicating with that managed service provider to know, what your networks are, what you're doing, what upgrades you need, where the spend is going.
I'd like to pull the thread just at least one more step on this organizational impact, because when I looked at the Aon research as we worked with your teams, probably the most interesting thing I saw, the thing I was telling everybody about inside of Rubrik, was the measurements around shareholder value loss. So, and I'll maybe tell your own research to yourself. That's always a little dangerous. But the metric around, organizations that go through one of these cyber attacks typically see a 9% decrease in shareholder value. That didn't surprise me. What I was surprised at was the opposite. Your research from Aon clearly points out that organizations that can successfully navigate a cyber attack actually see a 19% increase in shareholder value. And I think that's really important, because it seems like the scorecard has changed. It used to be a few years ago, all of us that were not involved in a breach, you read about it in the news, and it was either, they did or they didn't. And if they did, if they got compromised, they were bad. If they didn't, they were good. And I think we're rightfully so well past that. We're now able to judge performance in these moments. So I'd be curious how you see that. I mean, again, do you agree with kind of our assessment that retailers and consumers get to judge now their partners? And then what should we make out of that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is really good public relations, where a company can say, look, we spent $10 million over the past 3 years improving our cyber posture. And these are the 5 things that we did. So then, it's not a question of when, but if we got hit, we were able to mitigate it and to respond quickly and remediate. And we were, only down for 12 hours, and it didn't affect our customers, and it didn't affect our employees, and we handled it, and we have a great IT team. And so they can really turn it into a win, because I think nowadays, I think most organizations understand that everybody's a target. And again, it's not if, but when. So if a company handles that really well, and their tools all did what they're supposed to do, and their team had been trained and practiced, it's like a fire, right? So you do fire drills, and firemen constantly practice so that when the real thing happens, it's handled appropriately.
I think that the fire analogy is a really great one, because it really is about if you wait for the fire and that's when you start doing preparedness, it's just way too late. And every business you walk into has the fire evacuation plan and the fire extinguisher. And I think in cyber, we don't have some of that baked in expectations, particularly around resiliency. I just think my own opinion is we're still on that path. What do you see as the things organizations can do, again, before or after that cyber attack that is akin to the fire prevention, the fire preparedness? What would be the handful of things that you would really recommend organizations focus on?
So I use the fire extinguisher analogy all the time, that your incident response plan and your playbooks and the tabletops are the fire extinguisher. So you hope you never have to pull those out. But when a cyber attack happens, that's not when you want to start asking people like, who do we call? Who's our cyber insurance carrier? Who do we call for forensic response? Do we have a lawyer? Do we, what to do? It's all right there. And I always tell clients proactive is a lot cheaper than reactive. And so spending money on proactive solutions, all of the ones that I've mentioned, is always going to be cheaper than a cyber incident and response, because it's not just the forensic and the legal and the data breach notification that's the cost. It's the business interruption. It's the lost customers, maybe lost shareholder value, like you mentioned. And again, that tail can be very, very long for an organization.
Yeah, and we looked at parallels. We even looked at like FEMA in the US and like the emergency management framework, and no surprise, they're saying the exact same thing you are. They talk openly about $1 on prevention is the equivalent of $10 in response. And I think those things, we could benefit a lot from those lessons on cybersecurity. So I know we've covered a lot of ground, and I kind of want to end with a little bit more of a fun question. If you could just absolutely magic wand and change one thing, whether it's the intrusions, the risk cycle, I'm really curious what your magic wand would be. What's the one thing you would give to everybody or force everybody to do?
Force all of our clients to do, all the organizations to do, train their employees, and train not just the employees, the C-suite and the board as well. So I think it's a top-down notion for cyber security and cyber maturity.
I think that's dead on. And I don't see any time in any other realm outside of cyber where that's done and it doesn't pay off. So I think that's a really good one. Mine would definitely be increased visibility across hybrid environments. That would be my magic wand. I see lots of organizations struggle with it, and it's just very much like training. It really helps organizations be ready for those moments. Well, Heather, I could genuinely ask you 100 questions. I could just keep hammering away at, your experiences responding to these. I could keep asking endless questions about Aon's research, because I just have really enjoyed all this. And I just want to kind of end by saying we appreciate your time here on this meeting with us, and really appreciate Aon's partnership working with us in this research.
Thank you so much.
Well, very good. Stephen, Heather, thank you so much for your time, for your insight today. We're grateful. I want to tell our attendees we appreciate your time and attendance here as well. Stay tuned to the rest of our sessions today, and please give us feedback on any of these along the way. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you for your time and your attention today.